I used to do lots of things.
I used to do things and I'd say things and Jesus I was evil. Take things and break things and Jesus I was evil. I never shook baby.
All right. Welcome everyone to the latest episode of the Reckless Musecast. I'm sure for those of you who are watching this episode will notice that I got rid of my old co-host and I upgraded to a much better, newer one. I'm kidding. No, Ben, our current co-host, he's traveling right now, so he couldn't be here for this. But we wish him safe travels and hopefully we never hear from him again. But anyway, thank you, TJ, for coming on the show, man. We've been talking about doing this for a while. So you and I, we first met through our mutual friend Phil Gosselin, who we've had on the show.
Yeah.
Guy doing a lot of great work for helping artists who don't toe the woke line.
Of course. Yeah.
But since then, I've joined your band, and we've had a lot of cool, really fun jam sessions. We've had a lot of conversations too about what's going on culturally and about our creative process, and just a bunch of other deeper subjects. But I was hoping you can talk a little bit about your musical background, some of the more notable projects that you've worked on, and if you want to kind of take it away.
Awesome. Well, Joe, thanks for having me, man. It's a great pleasure. We have talked about this for a while, so it's great to finally be here in our respective studios. Although I was expecting today that we would be meeting exclusively at your place, so I had to kind of put my microphone up, I had to put my rig together kind of fast. But
yeah, sorry, but I'm in a garage that was converted to a bedroom that I live in, so it's not up to code. So I was like, baby. This is not a good recording podcast. But
I know that life. That's all good, man. Well, so anyway, a little bit about me. I'm a professional musician. I live in the greater Los Angeles area, and I've been here for about the past 23 years. I grew up in a small town called Wenatchee, Washington, up in the Pacific Northwest. Started playing drums when I was around 4 years old, and I never really looked back. My formal study of music took me after high school to the University of Michigan to pursue a bachelor's degree in music, and then to California at the California Institute of the Arts to do a master's degree. I was accepted to do doctoral studies at USC directly after my master's, and I decided to go on the road instead. And I never looked back from that. It was a lifestyle that I much preferred. And here I am 23 years later and still making my living via music. And it's just kind of gotten better and better as time has gone on. I have a couple of distinct specialties in school. My primary work was in classical and contemporary classical music, although I've been a drum set player my entire life, mostly in rock and jazz and related styles. During my undergrad and again in my master's degree, my focus really shifted heavily over to what you just described as world music, specifically music of the Middle East, Arabic and Persian styles. And then I play a great deal of North Indian classical music, and I've studied that very seriously for about the past 23 years since I came to California. And what that's given me now is a very interesting kind of hybridized set of skills. That I can step into these three different arenas of classical, drum set, and hand drum percussion. And then the synthesis between those three areas, that's sort of what people know me as being. I'm the guy who can play drum set in an Arabic style, but I can simultaneously play, classical Indian music, but on other percussion instruments. I can sort of move in and out of those mindsets. And that's kind of how I've built my career is, both steeped within these very traditional styles,
Right.
But also in the hybridized synthesis of all those styles and how that impacts creative music moving forward. So right now, some interesting projects that I've done. I recently released a new album of my own music with Run Downhill, which is the band that you have joined recently. There it is.
Album, 1920.
Nice, dude. And I'm very pleased with that record so far. I think it's my best stuff. It's the first record that I both engineered but also mixed myself. And and I think that's a kind of an interesting evolution just as an artist and technician simultaneously. It's pretty cool to have my hands on all phases of the project. Some recent touring, I toured with a wonderful Palestinian singer named Dalal Abu Amne, who I've known for about the past 15 years, and I've played with her both here in the US as well as back in the Middle East. But she came for a recent tour about a month and a half ago, and I joined her on that, along with some other members here in the LA community. And that was dynamite, really cool. I had another record, if I can plug one more record.
Yeah.
This is actually a really epic one. It's probably a little easier to see this. This is an artist named Diamanda Galas. And I've been a fan of Diamanda's work since the 90s. And it's very interesting that I now appear on one of her records. And
awesome.
I also do a lot of my own YouTube work. I have two different channels, one that's focused on TJ Troy percussion and different tutorials. And so what my career as a percussionist sort of looks like. And then I have another one just called Rundown Hill, or at Rundown Hill, I guess you should call it, is the handle.
Yeah.
And that's talking about the music of the band. But I also do some informal conversations and just sort of video kind of blogging and commentary. And I did a video recently that sort of told the story of how Diamanda and I got to know one another, why she wanted me to work on her record and what that process was like, which it took a lot of years for that particular seed to germinate fully and result in a record. And that's what that discussion is about. And truthfully, that's what a lot of my career has been about, is playing the long game and really committed to the long game. At the center of that are my very basic artistic practices of every day getting up and playing the drums.
Yeah.
And making sure that I get to it every single day, going out and playing with as many different artists as I can, and really nurturing those relationships, but nurturing the skill set and knowing that the skill set will continue to grow, so that at this point in my life, the skill set is quite formidable. And people respond to that when you sit down to play with them for the first time, and you instantly find yourself not only fitting in with the group, but making friends really easily because they respect you quickly.
Right.
And that's made for a really exciting set of circumstances where I can meet some super, super cool musicians that otherwise I wouldn't have the capacity to meet.
Right. That's awesome, man. No, and I love what you just brought up about, just like having that sort of militaristic discipline. And I know that for a lot of creative types, discipline is not something, they're sort of like, I'm just waiting until an idea comes, and then I'll pick up my instrument, or I'll pick up the pen and paper, I'll pick up the paintbrush. And it reminds me of a great quote, I think, from Jack London, and it's something like, don't wait for inspiration to come to you, light out after it with a club. It's like, no, like get up and go after it. Like go find that inspiration. Don't just sit there and wait for the muse to come to you.
That's exactly right. You actually have to be actively going to the muse on a regular basis, because the first thing that you have to do is form a relationship with it.
Yes.
Because, and especially if you're trying to make the turn from just being someone who's creative, which everybody has a right to be creative as much as their muse will serve them. There's nothing wrong with that. Sure. But if you want to turn the corner and become a professional creative individual, a professional musician, or a professional dancer, or a professional writer, or something like that, you have to have a relationship with the muse. I believe it was Alistair Sims. One of my favorite quotes was, "A professional is someone who does his best work even when he doesn't want to."
Yes.
Because there's those days when you're tired, or you're just not feeling quite right. You didn't get enough sleep. You didn't get enough to eat. You had a fight with someone important in your life, or something like that. Someone rattled or ruffled your feathers wrong. Yeah. But you got to get up and perform. Yeah. And so you have to be able to contextualize that within your own head, what the relationship is with the muse, enough to set the other bullshit aside and really get down to what you're there to do, which hopefully is make music, or write, or dance, or do whatever it is that you're there to create.
Absolutely, man. So when you're talking about your experience, being a professional, playing with musicians in the sort of quote unquote world music genres, that I think is a good segue into something that you and I have talked a lot about, which is what's going on in our culture, which is sort of like this hyper obsession with identity and things like that. it's very easy for a very woke, indoctrinated person to accuse you of cultural appropriation. So I'm and you know any other these kind of like dumb nonsense things, but it's like, you know, you treat the material with the utmost respect and courtesy, and so it's got to be weird for you, for someone who's just like, you know, I performed around the world, I've played with musicians of all backgrounds, and now you're saying that I have to sign this document saying that I have to be diverse and inclusive. Like, I've been doing this for decades. Why do I have to do it now? Like, haven't I done, like, like, I was wondering if you can talk a little bit about like either your experience or just sort of your thoughts on how this DEI stuff is affecting the arts and specifically musicians.
Sure. I hesitate to say what I'm about to say only because I don't want to let the last screw out of Pandora's box
Right.
and let the lid just fly open, because that's just kind of Murphy's law. As soon as you start to, especially what I'm about to say, which is that that notion of cultural appropriation has not come directly to my doorstep as a player.
Good.
It has come within my circle. But mostly just kind of on speculative things. Like you kind of ask yourself, like, why exactly is it that that person's not calling me right now? I've played with them for 10 years and all of a sudden I'm not their drummer anymore. Right. But I've never had that direct conversation where they say, like, actually, we don't want you here because you're white.
No.
They haven't specifically said that. Now, I will say, some couple of direct experiences, you know, and these are completely anecdotal. But the interesting thing when you talk about anecdotal evidence is you get enough of that, suddenly that becomes a cohort.
Right.
And then the cohort becomes the case study. So you get enough of these stories together and you start understanding the larger scope of how this is all happening. And hopefully you can start getting to the bottom of why. So there was a school here in Los Angeles, and I had worked for this school for years. Many years, like over 10 at least. And I knew the administrators within the music department well. And some of them I had gone to school with even. So the relationship goes back several decades. And I would work with them on various different programs. And at one point, the head of their, I want to say it was their orchestra, called me or emailed me, I should say. And it's important that the distinction is made. These conversations are happening via email,
Right?
Because they're anonymous, or at the very least, I don't have to show you in the tone of my voice how uncomfortable I am telling you what I'm about to say.
Right.
And I don't have to hear the disappointment in your voice. I only have to read it on email, and I can infer whatever meaning I want to on that. And I think that's actually important within this particular discourse when we're talking about DEI, or DIE is how I like to call it.
Yeah.
And so this email comes in and says, TJ, we're doing an arrangement of this particular orchestral piece that features a lot of Middle Eastern and North African rhythms. And I know that you're really a master of that stuff. I wonder if you'd be able to come in and coach our percussion section on how to play these things with an authentic sense of style. And I said, absolutely, I would love to do it. All I need to know is the date, the time, and I'll be there. And I didn't even ask him about a professional fee, because I've known him for so long and I've known the school for so long. They always take care of it. And so there's really no question as to whether or not they're gonna pay me, because they always did. And so I answered back. I said, I would love to do it. No problem. Tell me when, tell me where, and I'll see you then. Or and tell me what material you want me to cover specifically. Like, what are the rhythms that you're interested in? Okay. And so then I hear nothing for about 4 or 5 days, and I get an email in response. And the individual says to me, God, I'm so sorry. This has never happened. But I took this to my higher ups, and they know you and everything, but they really thought it would be more appropriate that we hire a person of color for this. So I'm so sorry, but now we can't hire you. By the way, do you happen to know a person of color who could do this?
Oh, shit.
And I didn't bother to respond to that. And I haven't even spoken to those individuals since. And again, this is anecdotal, but if you think about this, these stories sort of replay themselves over a very long timeline, and more of these things not only happen, but they advance further down the line. You know, a few years ago, and literally just a few years ago, it would not have been appropriate to say, we need a person of color to come and do this job. It wouldn't be appropriate just within respectable circles of the way that we communicate between one another, between
Right.
professionals, because it's a metric that, at least in the performing arts, has never mattered.
Right.
If you can do the job, then you're an artist,
Yeah.
and the respect that comes along with that is yours in droves.
Yes.
And all musicians feel this way. Now, to elaborate a little bit on your question, how has this impacted me in the various musical circles that I matriculate in? Hold on just a second. I kind of want to pull this down a little.
Yeah.
That way it's not directly in front of my face. There we are. That's a little better. And I will say that I work a lot in the Arabic community. I work a lot in the Persian community. I had been working a lot in the North Indian community, although over the last several years that has quieted. And I'll elaborate a little bit more on that in a moment. But very recently, this touring that I've been doing with these Arabic artists, first off, there's a local group in town, the Los Angeles Arab Orchestra, and I know the music director of that. He's a friend of mine. I've played with him in various groups, and he called me and said, "Would you be willing to come play in my group?" And I said, "Absolutely." I mean, without even a question.
Yeah.
And it was also the first real engaging musical experiences, but professional experiences, since COVID.
Right.
And so that was huge to me, to be able to even just be invited to go to a rehearsal with people in the room and get back to music making. So it really felt good on just sort of a spiritual level to connect with that. And those guys know me, they know my playing, and we all have a really good time with one another. It's just a hoot.
Yeah.
And so everybody on this tour was drawn from the orchestra. All right. So these are all people that I'm friends with. There was a couple of new people, however, and including a gentleman, Suhail Kaspar, who is one of the top darbuka players of his generation. Darbuka is the goblet-shaped Arabic drum that's played under the arm.
Okay?
And he is one of the great masters of his particular generation. He's about 70 years old right now. And I'd never met him before. In 23 years of living in Los Angeles, I'd never met him.
Yeah.
And
you'd heard of him before, right?
Oh,
before.
absolutely.
Oh,
absolutely.
Cool.
In fact, one of my favorite records, period, not just of Arabic music, but just of music, is a record that he did with another musician, Nasser Musa, in what we call the Khaliji style. It's a style of song. It's a style of rhythm and an approach to song making. And it's such a phenomenal record. So when we had a chance to meet, we introduced ourselves, and then we played for a little bit in the rehearsal for about an hour. And then during our first break, he came over to me and we were chit-chatting. He was asking about my gear. And then he's like, "Look, I got to tell you, I really love playing with you. It's feeling so good. And I'm so pleased that you're here." And I said, "Well, thank you, man. I appreciate that. It's a big thing for me to play with you, you know, because I've known of him and his work for so long." And he's like, "Well, I got to tell you, I know who you are. And I've known about you for a long time. I know the stuff that you do, and I really want to have a meeting with you, and I want to play more. I want to talk about things beyond just this." And that was really, really uplifting. Now, imagine this for just a second. Suhail is Syrian, and he was raised in Syria, obviously, and went to the Arabic Conservatory in Aleppo. It's either Aleppo or Damascus. I forget exactly where he was. But, this is the institution to learn how to play this music in the Middle East, to do so formally. Everybody else just learns the way that you would learn to play rock and roll or anything else. Just you try, you listen, you take a couple lessons, and you figure it out, right?
Yeah.
Well, he has formal training, and it shows because he's a master on his instrument. And so here he is, one of the top players of his generation, and he wants to have a meeting with me. And he wants to talk about how he and I can work together. And he's 30 years my senior. Which this is a big thing when someone of that generation, not only is he very gracious in helping the younger generation out and saying, "Come and work with me, and I want to present you to the Arabic community," is what he always said, right? So it's that an older generation musician reaches down to a younger generation musician, and this is how it's always been, always. The older generation reaches out to the younger generation and says, let me give you a hand because I like you and I believe in you.
Yeah.
Now that's a big thing, but it's also the cross-cultural reaching out and being generous across cultures. He didn't need to say anything to me.
Yeah.
He didn't need to give me a compliment because it's not scoring him any points. Like, what do I have to offer him except goodwill? Right. And he knows this and understands it. He's been around the block. He knows what goes on. He knows what people are after him to get favor and to curry favor. Right.
Right.
So I was genuinely moved by this for the reasons I just explained, not just for musical reasons, but this is a total stranger from a different culture, but he's including me as part of his musical family.
Yes.
And so as this tour was getting going and the music director called me, I had to ask several questions about the nature of the tour and who was involved, and am I going to run into any issues? Not just like a cross-cultural thing, because the entire band, there was 9 musicians, only 2 Americans, everybody else was Arabic. The entire concert was conducted in Arabic. All rehearsals are conducted in Arabic. And I speak a little bit of Arabic, but I am not a functional speaker, so I can't always understand what's going on, but I can get the gist of things, and people can translate here and there for a little bit, but it's not like they stop everything and give it to me in English. It's just like, you either keep up or don't. Sink or swim, right? Yeah. So I'm talking with him on the phone, and I said, look, I just I want to make sure that you guys are taking me on an even keel and not just as some token diversity player for you.
Yeah.
And he's like, oh, no, that's bullshit. He's like, that's all bullshit. No. He's like, you're here because you're a badass. And I want everyone to see you. And that's exactly what he said. He's like, I want my community to see who you are because they don't understand. Now, every time I play a concert of Arabic music, this has happened more than once. I don't want to say every time. More than once, people will come up to me and just start speaking to me in Arabic afterwards, under the assumption that I must understand. And it's happened both here and in the Middle East. I've traveled through the Middle East. I've had 5 tours over there, lots of concerts over there. So people speak to me a lot. And then the question that everybody asks, and now this is the every time question. They say, so are you Lebanese or Syrian?
Right.
Because there are a lot of like brown hair, blue-eyed Syrians and Lebanese. Okay. And so they look at me, are you Lebanese or Syrian? And I say, actually, I'm an American. They're like, oh gosh, that's so interesting. Well, your parents, is your mother or father Syrian or Lebanese? Well, it must have been your grandparents, actually, because there's no way that you can play this music the way that you're playing it unless you come from the culture. And I say, no, that's not true. It's not true. If you have a sincere heart, then the people who know the music can see that in you. They can feel your intent. People are really intuitive about reading one another, and they can read your intent. And if you're coming with sincerity and coming from a place of, I'm just here to learn as much as I can, you'd be surprised how much they will give, and they'll give quite freely. And on top of that, if you respond, if someone gives you a lesson and you come back in a week and you've mastered the material that they gave you, and they say, whoa, okay, let me give you some other shit. And then they up the ante and they give you harder shit because you can take it. And they're constantly cutting at you and putting more and more on you. And I always responded really well to that. And I made friends very quickly like that. And as time has gone on, again, this is 23 years. When I first finished my master's degree, that was 2001. And I, then started to try to go out and play just as much as possible and go to jam sessions and parties and meet as many people as possible. And I got my ass kicked a lot. Just because I couldn't keep up with those cats. Remember, Los Angeles is really a fantastic town for musicians, especially for musicians from other cultures. Like LA is home to so many countries' second largest population. It's the second largest population of Iranian nationals outside of Iran.
Right.
all live in Los Angeles. And
Yep.
it's the same, gosh, a few years ago, it was over 100 countries that fit that definition. LA was the home of the second largest population outside of the original country.
Yeah.
And people come here knowing that there's great musicians. So good musicians come to be with good musicians.
Yeah.
And they want to compete, and they want to get in front of people, and they want to try to be something, right?
Right.
So if you can start making friends and making inroads within those communities, and you're diligent, you practice, you get better, and you're a good person on top of that, these are universal values.
Right. Yes.
And nobody cares about diversity, inclusion, and equity.
Exactly. Yes.
Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I was going to bring this. Reminds me of a story from when I was in college, when I was studying music at Santa Clara University. We were looking for a professor to fill in. We were going to create a class. It was on, I think it was world music or internet, or no, it was ethnomusicology. And so it was interesting. So they actually brought in a range of prospective professors to give a presentation, and then the students wanted to go, and then they can grade the professor, and then whoever got the highest would move to the next round. And there was one professor, and I was lucky enough to actually study jazz and classical piano under him. He was only there for 1 year, but he, I mean, like super white, like awkward, nerdy, glasses, soft spoken, but he studied music from Uganda, and he actually he went there a lot, and so he gave a terrific presentation on Ugandan music. And it's one of those things where it's like, even though it'd been 8-10 years since he graduated, it was like he still went out there at least once a year because he'd made a lot of friends there. And same thing like what you said, he has a jazz and classical background, but he just loved the music from this one particular country. And this had to have been, let's see, I graduated in 2011, so this had to have been like 2008, 2009, around there. But it's crazy that in this culture that we're in right now, like that probably wouldn't fly. And one of the problems that I have, with people, throwing around accusations of cultural appropriation, is that they have appointed themselves the sort of gatekeeper of the culture, many times of a culture they don't even belong to. And so for this guy to be like, hey, like when I was going to Uganda, like they accepted me. They saw that I loved their music, and they welcomed me. They love sharing their music with me, and they love me sharing my music with them. So don't say, that like, oh, you can't play that because you don't have the right skin color, or you're not part of that culture. Another thing too is like, I'm Mexican, so every year for Halloween, I, especially on Twitter, you get some like, a handful of young Mexican activist types saying, hey, white people don't wear sombreros, and don't dress up as a bandito for Halloween. And it's like, have you ever been to a Mexican restaurant, especially like on Cinco de Mayo? It's like, we fucking love it when white people come and you get into the spirit of everything. It's like, what are you talking about, man? It's like, stop acting like you speak for this entire culture, when in fact that like most of the people of that culture, not only do they not care if people from other cultures, explore the culture, but in many ways they welcome it. It's fun. You're breaking down barriers.
It's flattering.
Yes, absolutely.
And especially if it can be done with like real fun, and also respect, because fun and respect tends to lead towards love.
Yes.
Right. Because there's a lot of joy when both of those, and when both manifest, like that's when you're hugging your waiter at the end of the night in that restaurant.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you're having a good time with everybody sort of equally. But so, you bring up ethnomusicology, and we're going to go on a really brief tangent here. I hope it's brief, but ethnomusicology in its own way, it sort of depends on who you are and which side of the spectrum you're on. You can problematize this or not.
Right,
okay.
Right.
I do not have a background in ethnomusicology. Okay. I am a performer. I know probably more than most ethnomusicologists know about the styles that I am well versed in, but not necessarily, depending on what type of knowledge that we're talking about. So ethnomusicology is exclusively an academic subject. It was created specifically to fill a contextual need of students, so that they would get to know music of other cultures, and therefore try to break some of that myopic vision of what a musician is supposed to be.
Yeah.
And a lot of those stereotypes exist to this day. Classical performers, they can't improvise. They can only play what's written on the page.
Right.
It's not as true as it used to be because there's a
Sure.
lot of classical players who can improvise,
Yeah.
but I would say it's still mostly true,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Meaning like somewhere around 51% or above makes that statement mostly true, right?
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think that's a safe bet to take. So what is musicology? But it's the study of the history, the culture, the nuance, the subtext of music, right? That's what a musicological study will be.
Right.
Ethnomusicology then is the study of those things, but within a specific ethnic context. All right.
Yep.
So within ethnomusicology, there's a bunch of, as many as you can possibly imagine, like subspecialties, and everybody chooses one.
Right.
Now, in the 1960s and the 1970s, as an academic subject, this was quite en vogue. Okay. And especially when there were certain musics, like in the 70s, Arabic music got very famous, very popular in the United States, and Indian music was through the roof in the early 70s.
Ravi Shankar and
oh, yeah.
was a big part of that. Yeah.
Ali Akbar Khan, and then the different collaborative events with Yehudi Menuhin, the violinist, both Ali Akbar Khan Sahib and Ravi Shankarji, both of them had collaborations with him. And the list goes on and on about these players coming from these other parts of the world, doing concerts here, people here falling in love with that. And then the academic institutions caught on. If we add this to the curriculum, we should be able to, in theory, expand the consciousness of our students. But also, from a practical standpoint, we could potentially expand the curriculum to include additional sources of funding. Okay. Now, as time has gone on, ethnomusicology, I think, is ranked in like the bottom 5 most worthless college degrees that you can pursue. And the reason for this is if you look at this from a job placement standpoint, when you go get a degree in ethnomusicology, you don't get your bachelor's degree in it. It's a graduate degree or a doctoral thesis course of study. Okay. So it's either a master's degree or a PhD.
Yeah.
I think you can maybe minor in ethnomusicology. Maybe there's some schools where you could major in it as an undergrad, but most people get to it in their graduate work. And the reason that you go through graduate work, and especially at the doctoral and postdoctoral level, is to give you the credential to then teach at a university level. That's the exclusive purpose behind that, especially as a musician. You don't go because you're going to practice more and get better.
Right.
If you want to play, get in the practice room and play and go rehearse with people, but don't go get a PhD thinking you're going to become a better player. It's not how it works.
Right.
And so people would then go to get this PhD, and they're learning from a professor who is passionate about the music and has spent a lot of time over there. And there's like this notion within academia, and this is where the spillover into sociology occurs, where I think it is quite toxic and problematic. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Is you have a number of people who are still trying to find themselves out in their undergraduate. And when they're junior or senior, they take a couple of ethnomusicology courses where the person is just so alive with their knowledge of this music. And isn't it different from Western music? Like, look at this notation system. It's so different. It's so much better. Right. And so you start to create this hierarchy, which in a lot of academic institutions can become quite anti-Western.
Yes. Yeah.
If you're not careful with it. And so the young person gets enamored with that and says, I wonder if I could do that. And then the teacher says, well, you could come be a graduate student with me. And then he gets a pool of like 5 or 6 graduate students whose sole existence is to someday supplant that individual and take their place.
Right.
Or go off to another institution and get their own gig as an ethnomusicologist.
Yeah.
So if you think of this pyramid structure where you start with a couple of people, and then their students, and then their students, and then their students, because we're talking about 5 decades now since the 60s or 70s when this degree track became available. You're creating a whole class of highly educated individuals with no job placement whatsoever.
Right.
This is the problem with it. And so back to your story of this gentleman who had studied Ugandan music. there's a couple ways how this manifests nowadays within ethnomusicology and the collision with sociology.
Hmm.
Because to stick and talk about the music is kind of old hat. We've learned so much about the music.
Yeah.
And all the musicologists kind of agree that when you go to Uganda to study, really all you're getting is a snapshot of the summer of 2022 when you went over there.
Right.
What's going to happen in the spring of 2023 when so-and-so comes and has a new record out and they're playing these great gigs and suddenly the scene changes a little bit.
Yeah.
But you didn't get there again until 2024. You missed a whole year. But yet you come back and say, I have studied this as an academic subject and therefore I am the prime shaper of knowledge within this.
Yes.
Okay. So from a sociological standpoint, they said, let's not look at this from just a purely musical standpoint, but let's start examining the surrounding context. What clothing are they wearing, for example? Right? What is their political leanings? Like, do these songs have meaning? Are they playing traditional music? Because traditional music is problematic in its own way because it represents the past.
Right.
And what's happening now is what's really important. You can't just master the past traditions, even though the entire tradition is based on however long the tradition's been going on. You got to be well versed in all of that. Otherwise, you don't have a framework of expertise. So nowadays, more and more musicologists just sort of focus on, the sociological ramifications. So I went to a concert. My latest essay in, whatever ethno journal is out there. My latest essay is my concert experience when I went to Carnegie Hall. And here is someone in traditional dress, but I could see that they had a necktie on underneath their garment. It's like, oh, that's interesting. Like they wore a Western suit and tie, but then they put a traditional garment on top of it. And doesn't that explain this important, intersectional ramification?
Creeping into like actual useful stuff.
Yeah, I mean that's postmodernism praxis, right?
Yes,
that is the embodiment of that out in the real world. Now back to what you were saying, you were admiring this guy for becoming interested in Ugandan music and going so far as to go over there, start building relationships, and coming back there year after year as a participant.
Yeah.
He'd be way better served to just start forging a career as a practitioner of that music and insert himself into that rather than to get the academic reinforcement that this guy, because we've hired him and we love his credentials, we now anoint him master of this subject.
Yeah.
And that is the false promise of academia.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's very masturbatory too, right? I mean, because it's supposed to be contained within the university. It's not really meant to these are the practical applications of these ideas. I'm sure that they have some other aspirations for that in some ways, but largely it sticks. And not only is it masturbatory, it's also very incestuous. It seems like
very much so. Very much so.
Oh man. I didn't know that about ethnomusicology. I thought it was like, just studying music from different cultures. I thought that's what it mostly was.
It used to be.
Yeah.
It used to be. But in order to stay relevant, it had to evolve. Yeah. And the evolution is to move it into anthropology, sociology, et cetera, to push it over there into the realm of direct human to human concerns, rather than the direct application of this is music. Yeah. Let's talk about the nuts and bolts of why it works, how it works. Yeah. And then, because in that academic setting, what you're hoping to do is reach young musicians in their minds. Yeah. And you're trying to show them other possibilities of how music can be put together, and therefore to create a flexible temperament. Yeah, a flexible mind. And this is the greatest gift that I think that a teacher can impart upon a younger mind, is to show there are a couple of wrong answers, but in music, there is a multitude of right answers. In other words, there's no single one way of doing things. Right, and when you can break out of that tunnel vision is when you set yourself free, or I should say, you're on the path to setting yourself free. Right. And that is what music is supposed to be about, is the liberation of the senses, the liberation of the spirit. And that's why, kind of bringing this back to your original question of DIE, et cetera. Yeah. That's why in so many musician circles, those ideas they just aren't catching on that well.
Yeah.
As much as people want to make a big to-do about how important it is, and within academic institutions, certainly
Yes.
it's going to be quite pervasive.
Right.
But when it's players getting together to play, it's really a non-issue, except amongst specific activists.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they are who they are. You run into some of them sometimes, especially on social media. There tends to be a lot of virtue signaling about how much of an activist they are, or how important this stuff is. But really, when it comes down to the players, the real players who want to play, it just doesn't have a lot of resonance.
Right. I remember one of the first, I think it's like the first or second time that you and I talked, you said something that stuck with me, and which is genuinely inclusive. You said something like, "Hey, look, I'm the kind of guy where it's like, do you like music? Cool, let's hang out. Do you play music? Cool, let's jam. Do you not like music? Okay, we can't hang out." But like, it was something along those lines. It's like, yeah, like, why is that not like the credo of musical arts institutions of like, do you like music?
No.
Okay, come on in, sort of thing, right?
The way that I look at that, whenever anyone tries to directly discuss DEI, with me directly, what I have come to understand after having those conversations, and having conversations with you certainly helped to formulate this viewpoint. If you really want to be honest, it was musicians and other performing artists who invented the concept of inclusivity in the first place.
Right.
Or at least we were really early on.
Yeah.
And it was because of that spirit that, do you play the guitar? Because I play the drums.
Yeah.
Do you want to jam sometime?
Yeah,
and
exactly.
I didn't ask you what your race was.
Right.
I didn't ask you if you were gay or straight or trans or anything like that, because those are the values that are insignificant within this particular dynamic. There's but one that is important, and that is, can you play an instrument?
Yeah.
Now, go beyond that is, do you want to learn to play? Because there's a bunch of stuff that I do that very few people in the world know how to do. And if you come to me and you ask me earnestly, I really want to learn some of this material from you, well, then you already are a part of this. And you have a place here. And all you needed to do was you formulate it in your own heart. And then you act out that orientation. And I can see it.
Yes.
And any musician would be able to see it. Now, from there, the concept of diversity. Because if you start to look at this inclusive nature, that if you're an ardent musician, if a serious musician, if you put the love of music before you put other things, diversity becomes another non-issue, because I'm not looking at race, and I'm not looking at gender or sex, and I'm not looking at orientation or any of those metrics.
Right.
Instead, I'm just looking at your love for music.
Yeah.
So diversity becomes, I don't want to say easy, because I don't want to downplay that a lot of people think that that's a serious topic within this.
Right.
It is a serious topic, but it's one that takes care of itself.
Yes.
It's one that is self-correcting, in other words.
Exactly.
And you see that in musicians communities everywhere you go.
Oh, absolutely. I wrote an article about this, about a similar topic on Medium. It was like everything I learned about diversity from Metallica and other heavy metal bands, because people forget this. Kirk Hammett is Asian. He's Filipino. And it's like, I didn't even really, like, I've been a fan of Metallica since I was like 13, and I didn't even know that he was Asian until I didn't learn that until, I don't know, 2 years ago, maybe. But that's the thing. And I wouldn't be surprised if that's the same thing for a lot of fans. Like, oh, I didn't know that. It's like, well, because Metallica kicks ass. Like, I don't care about the race. I don't care about the gender or what country they're from. It's like, they kick ass. Slayer, another one of my favorite heavy metal bands. The singer is from Chile. And I was like, oh, hey, that's cool. He's Hispanic. That's cool. He's from South America. That's cool. Yeah, whatever. But I didn't know that. I'd listened to the band for 10 years, 15 years, and I didn't even realize it. And so, the point of the article was just listening out, like, by the way, here's this band, and the singer is female, but nobody says, oh, they're good for a female led band. It's like, oh, they're a good band. That's it. But it's one of those things where it's like, when someone can, like you said, in the music community, it's like when you love the music and you're contributing to it, it's just like the audience, color blindness becomes natural. It just happens. And so, it's so weird now that not only is color blindness kind of seems to be on the wane. Seems like this woke ideology is like, no, let's emphasize the importance of superficial characteristics. It's not only that, but it's like we're going to hold a gun to your career and your reputation, and we're going to say you have to recognize the importance of immutable characteristics. And it's like, we were actually doing a good job of getting rid of bigotry in the arts when we were just emphasizing the importance of talent and passion. So I have a lot of concerns about the quality of the arts when it's like, diverse candidates preferred or whatever. It's like,
I was reading in various conversations that I have with my friends, we don't always agree on things. And I was having one such conversation with a buddy, and we're talking about this exact issue. And I kind of gave you my shtick about inclusivity as being a core musical value, actually, and one that we all just accept because it comes part and parcel with how we learn to play.
Yes.
Right. Which is generally in a community of other people who were at our level, which means we're way down here and the master musicians we go to are way up here.
Right.
And we're all looking up.
Yeah.
And so you generally just try to look around you and say, can you be my friend? Because I'm struggling. I'm trying to come up. And they're like, yeah, me too. Maybe we should practice together for our next lesson or something. Those are the ways that those relationships get built. So, but I was on the phone with this buddy of mine, and he was saying, like, well, there's this new thing happening where, a lot of orchestras now are taking auditions, behind a screen. And so that you never even see the race or the gender, and they only hear the sound. And my jaw just hit the floor. I was like, they've been fucking doing this for like 70 years.
Yeah.
And it's always worked. And in fact, this is the preferred method of every conductor and music director anywhere in the world, because none of them care what you look like. If they did, it would just be a comedy show on stage, because they get a bunch of leggy women sitting up front. I mean, pardon me for being crass, but that's exactly what they would do.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
There was a publication. I can't remember if it was the New York Times or the Guardian, some mainstream publication, but it was like 5 years ago. They published an article saying, here's why colorblind or anonymous auditions actually lead to more diverse orchestras. And then, like a year late, a year ago,
they wrote the exact opposite,
and from the exact same publication. And they're like, here's how forcing diversity leads to more diversity. It's like, what the fuck? It was like a few years difference. It was crazy from the same publication.
I think the way that they framed that particular article was, here's how blind auditions actually harm diversity.
Yeah.
That was the framing of it. And you can see exactly where they're going with that, which is, if you took the screen away, you would pick the person of color.
Yeah.
And they're right, because so many music directors and so many personnel directors in these major institutions, the big orchestras especially, because they're so reliant on public and private funding, because they don't sell tickets the way that they used to. So they need endowment and they need donor money, right? And they are so frightened of the ramifications if they allowed the merits of the audition to follow through, come what may, with the race or gender of the candidate that they selected. They're petrified of this, because all it takes is one person to say, you know what, I didn't like that audition, I think you're a bunch of racists. And then they're done. They're done.
Exactly.
And it's so hard to recover when they start slinging those accusations around. So when the New York Times presents an article like that and they say blind auditions actually harm diversity, not only are they right, but it's something of an open threat, because someone from the New York Philharmonic reads that and they're like, oh shit, maybe we should stop. Maybe we should pull the screen away. And maybe that should be our focus. And in fact, you know what? That's the only choice that I have. Because maybe someone on the board starts to say something like, I read this article in the Times. The media, the press plays a far, far greater role in conditioning these responses than I think even we realize. We talk about it and we understand that it does, but the mechanism, the psychological mechanism that is being poked right there, I don't think we fully understand that. And it's dangerous because it pulls us away. It damages the art form in the long run.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's not related to music, but I'm sure I mentioned this before. During some of our early conversations. I used to work in Silicon Valley,
Right.
I worked in the Silicon Valley startup scene, and I got to work with some people who are very intelligent and very compassionate. And to be honest, I bought into some of this woke stuff, but then after listening to sort of IDW type figures, like Jordan Peterson and Brett and Eric Weinstein and all those guys, and kind of going, oh, maybe there's some, maybe we should be a little more skeptical of this diversity inclusion and implicit bias tests and things. And I was just stunned, and it wasn't even that I became right wing. It was just sort of like, hey, I'm all for giving everyone a fair chance. I'm all in favor of that, but there are better ways of going about this. And I was just stunned at seeing so many brilliant, talented, intelligent people just fall so easily for this ideology of like, oh, we have to hire, we need to be diverse, because there was an article published in Bloomberg that said companies that are more diverse are more productive. And it's, having more skin colors doesn't automatically lead to more, like, that logic doesn't add up.
Yeah, there's something missing in that equation. And,
exactly.
And it's so frustrating to hear those sorts of reductive arguments come right down. Yeah. It's so frustrating because there's so much more interesting shit to talk about behind it.
Yes.
You want to talk about efficiency, like, let's get down to nuts and bolts. How did you do it?
Right.
Maybe you could help the rest of corporate America get their efficiency up too. I could understand if maybe that's competition and you don't want to help them. But when you're trying to frame this as a larger societal issue, it's really lazy journalism in that respect. That's about the best that I can do for that without talking dirty words.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's this over reliance on like univariate analyses, where it's just sort of like, hey, we notice that there's this one little trend, therefore it must be this. And it's like, but when you break it down, when you break down the data, it's like you get a much more complex picture. And here's the thing: at the time, I wasn't even against diversity and inclusion. For me, it was more just like, can we talk? First of all, can we get a clear, solid definition of diversity and inclusion? Because right now, I think that those words get tossed around so often. And so, like, if we're going to implement an initiative, make sure like we're all on the same page here in terms of what that word means. Maybe there are times when we should be more diverse. Maybe there are times we should be more inclusive, but then maybe there are times when we shouldn't. And if there are times when we shouldn't, we should know when. That way we're not wasting time and money on a program that's not going to do anything useful for us. But it's like, no, it's just diversity and inclusion of the most superficial kind. But again, like you said, like the media plays a big part in this of just, it was featured in Fortune magazine, so therefore, blah, blah, blah. But it's sad, but I'm starting to see the tide turning. And for me, I'm going to give my side of this real quick, and but I do want to get your side of this. Whenever we have conversations like this on the podcast about how dire things are for creators, it's very easy to get very doom and gloom. But for me, like, the troublemaking side of me is like, good. Like, fucking artists, I think, are at their best when there are rules to break. And right now there are a bunch of fucking rules to break. And also it's just, the cold hard fact that, nothing good comes out of pessimism. So it's just like, so for me, it's like, all right, fine. There are a bunch of challenges that we have to deal with. Fine. Bring them our way. Let's fucking deal with it. Let's meet it up head on. But I'm curious about your take on culture. Are you more pessimistic? Are you sort of cautiously optimistic in the long term? What are your feelings about the future of the arts right now?
I'm a chronic optimist.
Okay, good.
Okay.
Cool. Glad you agree with it. Cool. Next subject. No.
Next subject. No, I think that you can never stifle the creative spirit. I think it's impossible. Right. And if you get frustrated and you check yourself out, there's only another person who's ready to go. And you can see the positives and negatives of that in your own personal experience. I'll leave that up to each individual to view that in their own way. Sure. What it says to me is, on those days when I feel frustrated about things, is get back in the practice room. And get back to playing and pick up the instrument and go to it. And what generally that does for me is, on a very basic and existential level, it calms me down. Because it's this thing that I've known for so long. It's an easy thing for me to go revisit and find my balance again. And I always come away feeling better for it. I have a rule which is, and I share this with all of my students, it's the 15-minute rule, that you have to sit down with your instrument for a minimum of 15 minutes. Okay. I practice between like 3 and 5 hours a day. That's sort of the target that I try to get, just because I have a varied skill set and I need to keep things fresh and going. So I sit down to practice multiple times during the day. But for students, I tell them, look, you have a 15-minute obligation. And you set a timer for that 15 minutes. And even if you don't want to do it, you get up and you do it. And at the end of that 15 minutes, if you still don't want to be there, okay, you've honored your obligation for the day. Now you can put it away and you can go on and do something different. But what happens most of the time is you get to the 15th minute and you have found the fire again. And so you continue on for another however many minutes until you get tired or you have another responsibility. But anyway, that's a little bit of an aside. To your question, I am a chronic optimist. I just can't defeat that. And I always believe that there's something more that I could be doing. And so I try to get after it as much as I can. And I encourage other people to get after it to the extent that they can. Sit down and practice. Try to write something. Call another musician on the friend or another friend on the phone and say, tell me about your playing. What are you working on? Right. What do you have going on? Share with people, communicate with people. And I just don't think that you can change or supplant the art form. You just cannot. Right. It will always be there. You could try to suppress it. You could also try to change it into something other than what it is, but you won't. Strangely enough, my faith in this was shaken quite a bit during COVID, specifically because everything was being taken away from us. Like the entire premise of why we play is to play for one another. Right. And that was taken away except via the internet. And we all very quickly learned that that was a very false sense of presentation. And did not reflect reality, and it didn't make us feel the same way. And that's how you knew it, is because in your heart and in your gut, you're like, something's wrong. It doesn't feel right. To chime into Zoom and try to see some asshole play scales in their room or something like that. It's like something's wrong here. But beyond that, what I also noticed was that musicians and artists in general were not raising their voice to show the absurdity of the situation. The gaslighting and misleading information that was being presented. Artists have always been on the forefront of that. They've always been the mirror of society, whether society liked it or not. There was always someone there saying, do you see what you look like? It's you in this picture. It's you in this song. And artists weren't doing that. And I don't understand, even to this day. I still don't understand why. And I don't think that we're going to know explicitly for a while, because so many people want to forget that this happened. They just want it to go away. They want it to be done. And they're trying. Hey, we'll never get back to normal. It'll never be normal again. Well, normal to you means avoiding asking this question. And related questions, right? That's what normal. We'll be satisfied with that. And that's, the Atlantic came out last week, and that op-ed was, we should declare a COVID amnesty.
Yes, I read that. Oh, that was painful. That was cringy.
Horrible. It's horrible because there's
let's agree to disagree. That's just kind of water under the bridge. It's like, oh, come on, dude. Like, or
there's people who think that is the path forward. That let's just forget about it. It'll be fine. Let's just forget about it.
Yeah, we were monsters to each other, but
it'll be all right. It'll be all right.
Yeah, this wasn't just like, an incident at like a drunken, office Christmas party where it's like, let's just pretend, let's forget that didn't happen. No, people lost their livelihoods for nothing, basically, ultimately. And I'm not sure if that wasn't COVID, but it's like there were a lot of crazy restrictions that should not have been put in place for as long as they were. Yeah, man.
Yeah. So in looking to the future of where music goes from this, I don't know. And I think that's kind of part of the optimism, honestly, I'm interested in seeing how this unfolds. And seeing how the landscape looks once it starts to open up a little bit more, because it's opening up a little bit now. In my experience as of late, playing for audiences people are just drunk in love with live music again.
Oh yeah.
You know,
Oh yeah.
and
I go to the whiskey like every week. So
yeah, that is,
yeah,
you know, and you and I have hung out. We've gone to shows,
yeah.
and you see people out there loving music more than ever,
Yeah.
and especially with styles of music that just resonate with people, and how on whatever basis that is, if it's an experiential level, if it's just that song makes me feel something, or it brings back a memory of something. I used to go play every 2 weeks in a convalescent home in Beverly Hills. And what was always so fun about that is the songs that people requested, I would go home and learn. And then I would learn related songs from that era, and I'd bring those in. And you could see it on their faces whether or not this resonated with them.
Yeah.
You know, and beyond that, it also brought out higher levels of performance from you when they're really feeling a song and really enjoying it. It brings something more out of you as a player. And so I think that future for whatever music is going to turn into and how it's going to manifest, the future is reliant upon live performance. It can never be replaced. The deliverable asset of a live concert may change. And I was quite worried for a long time just about the psychology of the audience member being unwilling to come into a venue and sit down next to a stranger.
Right.
I thought that that would have been erased. I am really glad to be proven wrong that people are filling halls. Now it's very slowly that those halls are coming back. From what I understand, like the LA Phil is still having a hard time filling the hall.
Yeah.
You know, so some of the bigger institutions are still having a hard time with that. When this Palestinian singer Dalal came, we had great audiences. And you know, Houston was almost a sellout. New Jersey was a sellout. You know, we did well in a lot of places because people are so hungry to get out and have those experiences, to play and to hear live music. And that's what I'm banking on, is that people are still going to want that. Now, I'm slightly chagrined because I love recordings. And as time has gone on, the recorded music medium has changed so dramatically, thanks to the curse of technological innovation. Right. The more that the technology has advanced, the easier it is to deliver music directly to the consumer. And that has made the market flooded with music. And a lot of it is inconsequential music that you could go your whole life without hearing because you won't remember a note of it. You know, but when you do hear those transcendent pieces, right, it could be something simple, it could be something complex. It doesn't matter. If it moves you, you know it. It's so much harder to find those now. From a recorded standpoint. And as you and I have been discussing recently, when we're talking about how to get Rundown Hill booked, you know, the recordings sound fantastic and people really like the recordings. But they're not booking us. Because we haven't played in 3 years. Well, who the fuck has played in the past 3 years? No one. So who is it then that shows up to a booking conference or talks to a booking agent at a bar in Los Angeles and is like, oh yeah, bro, we have this live video from our last show. It's got 1 million views on it. No, it doesn't. Those aren't real. Like, and if they were, then how did you go out and play live concerts to build a 1 million man army to watch your videos? Because if you're like me, those videos vanish in the ether. So there's a couple of possibilities. Is it people who are paying for plays? You pay to play, pay for spins on whatever platform, YouTube or Spotify or whatever. Are they really that diamond in the rough? Well, that's exceptionally rare, you know, but that's possible, you know, or have they really gone out and developed those audiences? I think it's the first one where people are just paying. Because it's easy to do, you know.
It is.
So that's kind of the only pessimistic view that I have on the moving forward part is the technology itself. From a recording standpoint, I think the technology has evolved to a really cool place. It's easy to make your own records. But I was talking with my tabla teacher about this, and I was asking him, do you have any new projects coming up? And he said, well, I have a new recording coming out soon. It should be pretty good. And I said, was it made over here or was it made in India? And he said, it was over here. He said, all the recording studios in India are closing and everyone is just recording at home. Well, that's what happened in Los Angeles, but in the 2000 aughts.
Yeah.
2005 through 2010 is when you saw all the major studios closing.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
O. Henry closed, Cherokee closed. I mean, you name it, all of the places closed.
Right.
Now, there's a reason that those places existed in the first place, because they sounded that good.
Yes.
Like the Fox soundstage where they did Star Wars and where they recorded The Simpsons.
Yeah.
Like those are magical.
I've been to that. I've been there actually.
Yeah, I have too.
Yeah, it's super cool.
Just to walk into that room and listen to yourself talk, you're like, oh wow, now I understand.
Yes.
Now I understand. Or you walk into Capitol Records A studio and you start to set up, and just hearing the sound of your hardware touching the floor or shaking someone's hand or something, you're like, oh my God, listen to the resonance in the room. And you like it will stop me dead in my tracks. I'm like, oh my God, listen to that for a second.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Because
I had the luxury of going. It was a friend of a friend of a friend who got me a private tour of I think it's East West Studios.
Yeah.
I think it's on Hollywood or Sunset Boulevard. Anyways, it's in Hollywood there. It was funny. So that studio had been around since at least the 60s, maybe even sooner. But I know like Frank Sinatra recorded New York, and everything else onward there. The Beach Boys recorded there. Metallica and Slayer recorded there. Justin Bieber, rapper, John Mayer, like so many people. And it's amazing. I'm in one sense, I'm definitely not knocking, the fact that a person can get pretty near studio quality recording stuff, in the privacy of their own home for a much cheaper price. But there is something magical about being, at East West Studios. Like they had like this huge hall. And so like, oh, usually like bigger ensembles and orchestras will record here, but sometimes we'll have a smaller band like John Mayer and his blues trio. When he just liked the sound of this huge hall, so he recorded here. And then just having like smaller and smaller studios, and now here's the vocal booth and blah blah blah. But it's just like that's sort of on its way out nowadays, unfortunately.
Yeah. And I have 2 points towards that. One is the way that music is now put together for the most part is by individual tracking in layers.
Yeah, right.
And so you'll get someone who comes in and lays a foundational track, if that's a quantized keyboard track or a scratch guitar track done to a click with a scratch vocal or something like that, just to show a template of the song. And then they'll bring in, maybe the drummer and the bass player will play together, or the drummer will play by himself and the bass player and rhythm guitarist will come in, or something like that, but usually going one at a time. And that's how I've made a lot of my own records. I recorded here in my home studio as well. In fact, the 1920 record, that was all done here in Pasadena, in the room that you're looking at right now.
Oh, cool.
That record was done here. So, and what that creates is, it's a certain style of record that creates. It's difficult often to create that entire package live. Especially someone like me. I mean, if you can look around behind me, the marimba's here, the tabla are over here. My drum set is just to the left of me, kind of off camera. I have another rack with a whole bunch of drums just right to my right. And so, for me, I could just sort of let my curiosity take me wherever I want to go, and I can start grabbing pieces or set up microphones on the marimba. My vibraphone is in the garage, so if I want to track that, I have to take something apart to bring the vibraphone in. But I can really turn over sounds very quickly like that. And that creates a certain style of record. To go into a big studio, you need to have your A game, because that's $1,500 a day. Or more, it can be upwards of, $3,000 a day at some place like Sunset Sound, and even more depending on who the engineer is with that. You're not there to experiment. You're not on the record company's dime. That doesn't exist anymore. You're on your dime. So unless you have your shit together and you're ready to play those songs, then that's not a good investment of your time and money. But if you are ready to play, and like I said, you can bring your A game and you're ready to play that song on the first or second take, and it's going to be golden. Man, that's beautiful. That's a great way to make a record. I love it.
Yeah. Absolutely, man. So I know you got you're on a bit of a time crunch. Do
Yeah,
you
a
have a
little
little
bit,
bit
man.
more?
I'm sorry.
No,
Um,
that's fine. I mean,
yeah,
we'd love
I
to have you back
have
on.
I have just 5 minutes or something like that.
Okay,
Yeah,
well, so I want to talk more about the creative process, but I mean,
yeah.
worst case, we could just we would love to have you back on again sometime. But I do want to
It'll be
ask you
my
one
pleasure,
quick.
man. Anytime.
Yeah, oh,
Yeah.
totally, man. But I do want to ask you one question though. Do you
Mhm.
have a weird or quirky habit with your creative process at all? Like something that someone who's not creative would be like, huh, that's weird. That gives you inspiration. Like, do you have anything like that you feel comfortable sharing at least?
I'm honestly comfortable sharing anything about my
Okay,
practices.
cool.
I don't know if I have anything that's exemplary or interesting.
Mm,
Um, I will say I do like to write.
mm,
So I sit down, I write essays, I write fiction, I write some nonfiction. Um, when I do that, I cannot listen to music.
yeah, yeah.
I cannot,
Mm,
because what happens when music turns on, my mind immediately goes there and I
mm,
get inside the recording.
yeah,
I mean, I love music.
yeah, yeah,
It is just it's my lifeblood, and
yeah.
I can't help it but to get inside that and stay inside that. So here's one quirk, maybe. Um, you're asking about creative process and quirkiness.
Yeah, yeah.
I really lose track of time.
Oh,
And sometimes I forget what day it is,
oh well.
and sometimes days will end up running into each other, and I've had that experience where I've either been writing something that I'm really cued in on. When you
Yeah,
write a song, you kind of know really early on, like, there's something really special and magical happening with this,
yeah.
and I've gained the discipline over the years to understand, when you're on a good one, you stay there. You
Mm,
stay with that. And it's only until you really reach either an elegant ending point to that session,
yeah,
or you are completely stuck and you
right.
cannot get unstuck. That's the only acceptable points when you can let go of this. Otherwise, stay in it and
Mm,
keep hashing away at it, because
yeah.
songwriting, and especially recording, is a lot like sculpture.
Mm,
Is that you are adding or removing things until you start to see the shape reveal itself.
mm,
And then you're like, aha, now I know what it is that's inside the stone or what's inside the song. And now I know how to extract it out.
yeah.
And so sometimes I will be in sessions, whether it's a writing session or a recording session, and 14, 16, 18 hours go by and I have zero concept of it,
Oh wow.
except for bathroom breaks. And I've
Right.
actually gotten in trouble when I forgot what day it was. I had no idea. It's like, oh
Yeah.
my God, like I was just so involved in writing a song, that I forgot what it was, and it ended up getting me in trouble.
That's amazing, man. I'm like I aspire to get to that level of mania. Um right now I'm the exact opposite. Like I'll be like, okay, you have 30 minutes. Pretend there's a gun pointed at your head and there's a voice saying, "Just create." And I'm like, okay, I got to do something. I got to, and I find it to be very productive though. I find
Mhm.
where it's because like it forces me to zero in. Like so I even have a stopwatch and it'll be like, okay, you have 30 minutes to do something. It could even be something small, but you
Yeah.
have to master that small thing in a small amount of in this limited amount of time.
I'm a
Um,
huge fan of timers, man.
oh yeah, yeah.
I set a lot of timers for myself to do what you just said. You've got 15 minutes, go.
Yeah.
You
I
know?
do. I did something similar though. So years and years ago, I did actually have a professional screenwriting job. It didn't lead to anything. I got a few $100 out of it, but I was rewriting a horror script, and I would, in order to induce states of madness, I would like sleep deprivation.
Mhm.
So which helped, but I do not recommend it. I don't think I'll ever do that again, unless like I just get so possessed by something. But yeah, when it starts to border on like unhealthy, sort of habits, that's usually where I back off. Uh, I know you got to go, so I won't get into this, but it was the same person I had two screenwriting jobs with, and
Mhm.
both jobs almost turned me into an alcoholic. But I'll
Mm.
save that for another time.
Yeah,
Luckily,
dude.
that did not happen.
Well, that's good.
but
Yeah.
but thank you so much, man. This
Oh,
was
it's
a
my
lot of
pleasure,
fun.
man. Thank you for having me. It's really, really great to chat with you. And
Yeah,
keep up the good work, both you guys,
yeah.
with what you're doing here with Reckless Muse. We need more voices like this, I think, and just to be able to sit down and have frank discussions and let things open up and come what may. I think this is the type of discourse that we should be really investing in. So thank you.
Thanks, man. I really appreciate that. And I look forward to the next jam session.
Right on,
and and just real quick, if you can just tell the audience where they can find you.
Absolutely. So you can go to my website, tjtroy.com. A better place actually is YouTube. The percussion channel is called TJ Troy Music. Lots of percussion tutorials and demonstrations and fun work samples and whatnot. You could also go to rundownhillmusic.com. This is the website for the band. You could also find us on Spotify. The record's been doing really well on Spotify, which I'm really proud of. And it's done relatively well on YouTube. By the way, I didn't share with your audience, so let me do it really quickly.
Yeah.
Rundownhill cross-contextualizes music and comic books simultaneously. So in the past, what we've done is we've released records in the back of our comic book. So we write a comic, have an artist draw it, or I write the comics, and then as I produce the records, the songs on the record correspond with chapters in the book. For this most recent record, I kind of broke away from the main narrative arc that I was on for a long time and just sort of did more of a free association approach. And maybe we should talk more about this in depth next time you and I get a chance to talk. Just the nature of how these songs came together. Every song on the record was written in one day or less.
Wow.
Now, the recording process took a much longer time, but the writing process, every song was done in a day. And that was its own interesting experience. And then I created comic strips to go along with each song. So if you go to YouTube, and the YouTube channel is at Rundownhill on YouTube, and you can see the playlist for 1920. It will be these little comic vignettes that are drawn by a surrealist comic artist in Toronto, Canada, named Claudio Gerardo. And I love Claudio's style. He's such a weirdo. It's awesome, though. I think it just fits so well with the spirit of the record, just kind of that free association, kind of psychological style record that this ended up being. So yeah, you can go to either of those YouTube channels, and there's a lot of good content there. On Instagram, it's run_downhill, and there's a bunch of cool stuff there as well. So
cool. Well, thank you so much, TJ. And
it's my pleasure,
we'll have
buddy.
you back on soon, man. And looking forward to the next jam session. Take care, everybody.
Rock on, Joe. Take care.